of people with darker skin tones. The one in the bottom actually has to do with self-driving cars. Self-driving cars apparently can misidentify people with darker skin tones, I suspect because they haven't been used often enough in the training data set. So here you might be developing technology. The technology may be really cutting edge, but because you didn't give some thought to something as simple as training data, you may end up doing something that doesn't deliver benefit, but actually delivers just the opposite. So this is why I say ethics is an everyday act. Every morning you have to wake up and ask yourself, are the things that I'm doing, do they help deliver equity, do they help deliver ethics? And you have to ask yourself that question every day, because absent that, it's really easy to fall afoul. A couple of great headlines over here. If the training data is skewed, you end up with bad results. So top article talks about training data as it relates to gender. Bottom article deals with training data as it affects people who are Black. And if training data is skewed, the results you get are bad. It may be that it's unintentional, but the effects are still bad. So it would be as if you got run over by a car, it wouldn't matter if the person ran over you intentionally or by accident, you'd still be dead. So it's really important to wake up every day and examine how it is that you're using data for ethical purposes. Fintech, financial technology, as you all probably know, is really being revolutionized by the advent of data signatures and machine learning. It also has the prospect of delivering inequity. And the example cited here from this paper, you'll see the excerpted text, is using data which seems to be completely harmless in terms of doing something that might be damaging, but actually having it result in something that's discriminatory. And this particular excerpt here has to do with correlating the high school you attended to your loan worthiness. And we can all see why that might end up being discriminatory when it comes to race, because so many high schools are heavily weighted to one ethnicity or the other. Even Facebook, one of the leaders in using data and using technology and machine learning, this paper highlighted how it was actually quite bad at showing appropriate job ads to people, either based on gender, and that's the graph you see on the left-hand side, or based on ethnicity, and the graph you see on the right-hand side, on what kinds of jobs are offered to people who are of different ethnic groups or different genders, and how that data ended up being skewed. This is Facebook that's messing it up. So if Facebook can mess it up, certainly any of us as a startup or practitioner within a larger company might also commit these same sorts of errors unintentionally. Amazon, as you may have heard, once upon a time, they were actually trying to find a way of sorting resumes for all the thousands of people that apply for jobs that come open at Amazon. And again, because of machine learning and training data and things like that, they inadvertently created something that discriminated against women. So once again, Amazon, one of the top companies on the planet, truly one of the top 5 companies on the planet when it comes to big data and machine learning, even they mess it up. So when it comes to data, even the unintentional damage that it might cause, it's still damage. This is why, once again, every morning, if you're a practitioner and using data, you want to deliver social justice, you have to look yourself in the mirror every morning and ask yourself if you're doing everything that you can, because these things can occur unbeknownst to you. Ethics is an everyday act. So what I mean by that is that it's a lot like parenting. When you're a parent, there's no single policy that you pursue to be a good parent. You wake up every morning and everything you do during the course of the day is architected towards being a good and effective parent. And it's the same with ethics and social justice using data. It's not enough to have a policy in place. It's not enough to have a protocol in place. You really need to wake up every morning and see, what is it we're doing? What might be you're doing wrong? Re-examine your actions every day. A couple of examples here. If you look at the top 2 papers, they have to do with monitoring biometric signatures from medical devices. It's actually also fairly straightforward to extract the identity of the person who might be surrendering that biometric data through a wearable. So you need to guard against that because it may be something that's identifying somebody who's suffering from a health condition. Article on the bottom has to do with there's a lot of work that's being done in applying AI and hopefully helping to better our lives, but is it being done with the informed consent of the people who are subject to it? And these are the kinds of things that we also have to think about to make sure that we're practicing data in an ethical way. So once again, ethics is an everyday act. It's something that we have to do from the ground up. No solution, no technology solution is sustainable if it isn't ethical. Actually, no business is sustainable if it isn't ethical. So if you have a barbershop or a dry cleaner, if that barbershop or dry cleaner is not ethical, guess what? Business dries up, it goes away. It's super important to focus on this, and not only because it's the right thing to do, but it's also good business, as it turns out. As I mentioned, ethics is a constant process. It's not a policy or an event. It needs to be something that you internalize and that every person on your team internalizes so that you can do the right thing always. You look at the two examples over here. If you create an application, and these both have to do with healthcare, but if you create an application which is inaccurate, particularly for something that's as crucial as healthcare, it may be that you did it with the best intentions in mind, but the inaccuracy actually renders that solution unethical. So once again, everything really hinges on this. Ethics is really the #1 competitive advantage for every company. And if you're a startup today and you're looking up at the giants who may exist, what is the best weapon that you can wield in being successful in combat with those large giants? Well, one thing is to found your company on ethics and stitch that data ethics into every fiber of the company's being. As we've seen with so many of these giant data companies, and you can think of the names of these companies pretty easily, pretty much each and every one of them has been cited and censured by the government for violating ethics or privacy. So this is not something that they stitched into their own soul, their own businesses when they were founded, but this is a great way for startups to build a competitive advantage from the very beginning. So remember, always be an ethics first business. A couple examples here on either side on how things like natural language processing can be misused, or even using behavioral economics and data to insert false memories in people, things like that. Lots of really, really dangerous things can be done using data, but we have to make sure that we don't do those things. And the article in the middle here really talks about job loss. And we talked about at the outset that I believe that everybody has a right to a livelihood. Everybody has a right to have a job which allows them to provide for themselves and for their loved ones. So if that is a human right, and automation actually takes jobs away and those jobs cannot be replaced, what's the implication for that? And this is a really complex question. I don't pretend to be wise enough to know the answer, but knowing that you're all smart, I'll give you some things to think about here and know that you'll reach your own conclusion. So, and all of these articles, by the way, are screenshotted so that should you choose to explore further, it's easy for you to find the source articles. And I like to think of this as being a combat between Iron Man and Terminator. So if you're familiar with these characters from movies, Terminator, of course, was a completely automated robot that was sent to destroy mankind, right? And Iron Man is technology which has been built to augment mankind, to make us stronger and more impactful. So one is full automation, which is bent on replacing human beings, while the other one is there to complement human beings. So automation, I think, is good, but we need to make sure that we're not pursuing a Terminator tack versus pursuing an Iron Man tack. And the Terminator effect will actually drive quite a bit of job loss. Lots of different articles over here. Stephen Hawking, even Elon Musk has talked about this, the Bank of England's chief economist. And for those of you who are either current or future Berkeley students, the article in the bottom right there is about John Hennessy and David Patterson, who shared the Turing Award in computer science a couple of years ago, and David Patterson was for a very long time a computer science professor at Berkeley. So, and all of these highlight the fear of job loss through automation. A few other articles over here. I see that there's some chats over here, so let me make sure that one of the chats isn't telling me something that I should be hearing. Hold on. Oops. Okay. Anyway, so a few different articles over here. All of these reach pretty much the same conclusion that automation will take jobs away, and replacing the jobs that have been taken away will be extremely difficult because those job categories will have been rendered obsolete. So this is something to think about as you create innovation using data yourself. There's for example, a number of companies that are doing automated agriculture, everything from picking strawberries to picking kiwi fruit. There are, I think, in the US over 1 million field workers in the agriculture sector. And what is the impact to them of automating agricultural harvesting if we cannot replace the jobs that they end up losing? So this is actually something to think about because it gets back to the whole aspect of social justice. Even things like journalism are being impacted. Article on the bottom there is Microsoft replacing journalists with robots as well. So as you think about automation, think about the broader impact of it. Just a ruthless effort to achieve optimization in economic terms may have a very, very negative effect on human beings and employment. So you may have heard about this company and this product, Flippy, which is a robot that makes hamburgers. This robot hamburger maker, here we go, makes $3 an hour and never goes home. But by doing so, it actually takes away an entry-level job for many people in America and elsewhere. So is this something which we should be pursuing, or should we be pursuing a more Iron Man sort of a solution where we can have technology complementing human beings rather than replacing them? So when you consider what it is that you're doing and employing data and technology for, think about what impacts it may have on job loss. And it may even be that if a particular sector is very badly hit in terms of job loss, there actually might end up being legislation in government saying that this kind of automation isn't good and there'll be some reason for it. And the companies and businesses that have been pursuing that innovation may not find themselves as being sustainable. So we talked about ethics. I have pre-tests here on ethics, and by the way, trying to apply these on a pretty constant basis. But the first thing is interview question tests. So as you probably know, when you're in a job interview, when you're interviewing somebody, there are a range of things you can't ask that candidate about because they're too intrusive. So you can't ask an applicant their sexual preference, religion, health, family status, health status, all of those things. You can't do so. So one thing, when you're sitting a lot of data, you can actually draw lots of correlations and conclusions. But one thing you should never do is to violate the interview question test. So you shouldn't be driving a correlation which allows you to find out, for example, any of these things. So if you're proscribed from being able to ask these questions in an in-person interview, your technology or machine learning shouldn't be trying to ferret this information out by doing correlation on the data that you've collected. So that's the interview question test. The second thing is also really powerful, which is the parental test, which is just ask yourself, hey, would my parents be proud of me if they knew what I was doing right now? And probably your answer will be no, it wouldn't be, in which case don't do it. And of course, the final one is the mirror test, is when you wake up in the morning, are you happy with the person that looks back at you from the other side of the mirror? And it's important that we feel good about who we are, and we'll feel good about who we are if we know that we're doing the right things and trying to enable social justice, not trying to enable social injustice. So we'll talk about an example here in healthcare. So there are many, many different areas where data can have a positive impact and deliver social justice and equity. We talked about some of the categories here at the beginning, things like education, Healthcare is a worldwide need and it's an evergreen need. Education is a worldwide need and it's an evergreen need. And because of this, they all need to be scalable. Now, all of these human rights that we talked about, the things that we all deserve, like healthcare, education, financial resources, things like that, the only way it works is if they're scalable. And that scalability is nicely enabled by the mobile devices that we all have in our pockets and the data that they consume and spit out. So we'll talk about just one example here, and that's within the example of healthcare. So the World Health Organization healthcare density, very stark figure here. Over 45% of member states in the WHO have less than one physician per 1,000 people. So think of that. Imagine having to vie with 999 other people for access to that one physician. So clearly we're very under-resourced in healthcare. And we're under-resourced not only in the developing world, but even in the developed world, this is the case. In the US, there's about 30 million people who don't have access to healthcare. So to put that in perspective, that's about the population of a country like Peru or Malaysia. So imagine a country the size of Peru or the size of Malaysia within the US where no one has access to healthcare. So this is a worldwide need and it will always be a need for human beings. So this is an evergreen need. And I think healthcare has two asymptotic goals. The first one is, because it's a human right, that healthcare be accessible to everybody. And for it to be accessible to everybody, scalability. We need to have healthcare that's scalability, that actually delivers scalability and is completely frictionless. So that's the first goal. And the second goal is that it's very predictive and preventive. Ideally, if we all die at 115 in our sleep and never have incurred a single dollar in healthcare, this is wonderful because this implies that each of us enjoyed a very high quality of life. So this is the second idealized goal, but to achieve this, healthcare needs to be predictive and preventive so that I never get sick, right? And healthcare is a zero-sum game. A dollar that we spend on one condition is a dollar that we can't spend on another. So we really have to focus on the impact of where we spend our dollars. Data and artificial intelligence allows us to deliver that scalable and predictive healthcare. The scalability is afforded through the mobile devices that are so ubiquitous and the data streams that are everywhere. And the prediction is also inherent in that. So AI does something really well, and it does correlation from the data and can predict outcomes. Getting healthcare either via pharmaceuticals or devices, certainly if we need them, that's great, we can get them. But in many places in the world, you can't access those pharmaceuticals or devices. So what's your best option in that case? Well, prevention is a great option. And for the things you see here on the right, which is healthcare which prescribes pharmaceuticals or devices, it requires that you have contact with the healthcare system. And that may not be possible either because of geography or because of economics. So what's our best, most effective platform? It's actually data. And data affords this non-contact form of healthcare where much of it comes straight through my mobile device. Healthcare is a zero-sum game. Again, and a dollar we spend on A is a dollar we can't spend on B. So let's make sure that the A that we pick is very high impact. So A that's very high impact would be heart surgery. A B that would be very low impact would be having my nose job done so I can be more handsome or something like that. So dollars are better spent in areas of high impact. And toward that end, if you think about the diagram that you see here with the axes of cost and prevention, it's best if we can keep people in the lowest tiers possible. So keep them healthy and don't develop so that they become symptomatic or become acute, where the cost of care is very high. So how can we keep people as healthy as possible? Well, this is where digital healthcare interventions come into play. So a great way of delivering equity in a cost-efficient way, which is accessible to as many people as possible. AI today is very much classified by the science aspect of it. It all comes down to the techniques that are out there. Those are fine as classification techniques, but I think that the more important classification is the impact that they can have, these technologies can have. And there's full contact AI, for example, doing things like pathology image analysis, but there's also the non-contact AI, interpreting the signals off mobile devices and things like that to be able to correctly diagnose, in many cases treat, in many cases prevent the onset of disease. So this leads us to this big question of what is healthcare data? Because of course we're talking about data and achieving social equity and social justice through data. All data is healthcare data. In the past, if you went and saw the doctor, or even today, you go see the doctor, she'll ask you for these sorts of things. Oh, we're going to look at your EKGs, your cholesterol count, weight, protein structures, DNA sequences, etc., which are all great for assessing the state of your health, but it doesn't scale very well. It requires that I have contact with that physician. And if I don't have that contact with the physician, either because he or she is not physically present where I am, or he or she is too expensive for me to afford, then I don't derive the benefit of the healthcare at all. So traditional healthcare has been done in this fashion, and it needs to be complemented by something which is non-contact. And what we'll talk about here is that all data is healthcare data. So not just the signals talked about on the previous slide, but also a really large number of different signals that you can get from mobile devices. And it's everything from your photo, we'll talk about how that happens, your voice signature, images, retinal scans, heart rate, lesions you may have on your skin, population demographics, even social engagement. All these things are actually deterministic of the state of your health. And these are all scalable because they're non-contact. You can do this through your mobile device. So you can enjoy the benefits of this healthcare no matter where you may be situated in the world. So take a look at this paper. It was published a few years ago. It's three-dimensional human facial morphologies as robust aging markers. So essentially this is doing an AI analytic on your facial image and using that to determine the state of your health. Simple way to think of it is that if you're 50 and you look like you're 30, you're in good health. If you're 30 and you look like you're 50, your health may not be so good. That's basically what this article said. And you can look at the underlined and highlighted text here, and the highlights and underlines are mine, but more reliable than blood profiles to reflect general health status. So once again, you may be in a society where healthcare resources are low, are small. How do you identify and stratify the patients who the physician should see in person versus the ones who can maybe wait and see them later? What simple way to do so is to do a facial analytic. So if you see, next time you see someone taking a selfie, they're not being vain. Actually, they're collecting biomarkers, right, for the maintenance of their health. So this is a way of delivering social justice using data. When it comes to something like dermatology, it turns out that AI-driven dermatology outperforms not just your regular dermatologist, but your expert dermatologist. That's because these dermatological images lend themselves really well to things like convolutional neural networks. So again, you may be either unable to afford a dermatologist, not have access to a dermatologist, or you may just be someone wondering, hey, what's the spot I have on my arm? What does it mean? Here's a great way for you to actually put your mind at ease or tell you you have to go seek contact-based care. So the cell phone camera is actually a scalable biomarker collection device. And AI is super powerful. So you look at the results of this study of doing diagnosis, so evaluation, accurate diagnosis of pediatric diseases, and look at the rates of accuracy of the AI versus of the human physician. So outperforming in many cases here the human physician. And there's pretty much no end of this research work that's been done in medicine on employing data signals to do things like diagnosis, prevention, and treatment. Just some examples over here. You don't have to read the titles, but you can run these down later if you wish. But there's basically no end of this stuff. There are, I'm going to guess, thousands of papers such as this that have achieved breakthroughs in interpreting data signals of all kinds. So this is one of my favorite ones here. You see the one in the center on the bottom, estimating sheep pain level using facial action unit detection. So understanding if a sheep is feeling pain. You can see why this would work for human beings. You know, is Shomit feeling pain when he's calling into the doctor for his video call or not? Should I see Shomit first or should I see Akshat first? And you think about it, human faces are quite expressive. So the problem that was solved in this paper rather, was a pretty difficult one. It's interpreting the pain of a sheep. And I don't know about you, but all sheep pretty much look alike to me. But this technology was actually so keen that even on sheep, it was able to decipher pain levels. Lots and lots of work that's been done in and around medicine, as you can see from here. And because healthcare is an evergreen and around the world sort of a need, this is a great application of delivering social justice using data. So look at the underlying text here in red on the top left. Passive measures from your smartphone could be used to continuously monitor laboratory equivalent healthcare signals for cognitive function. Here you can see the headline on the paper on the bottom left. Voice signal characteristics are independently associated with, get this, coronary artery disease. So you may or may not have access to a cardiologist, but how can we help interpret the state of your cardiac health? It may be something as simple as your voice signal on your mobile device. Pretty cool, detecting middle ear fluid using smartphones. Think about how scalable that is. Once again, if you're in an area that's under-resourced from a healthcare perspective, how do you find something like a fluid in the ear? You can use a very simple multi-purpose device. Smartphones have even been turned into ultrasound scanners. Contactless cardiac arrest detection using smart devices. Again, no end of this stuff. So where's a good focus if any of your budding entrepreneurs thinking about, I want to use data, but you want to use data for good? There's a very rich field of application within healthcare. So only non-contact AI scales. Contact AI, which would be if I have possibly a cancerous growth, I can go to the doctor. He or she will do a biopsy. They can run it through an AI analysis and figure out was this cancerous or not. Wonderful, it comes back negative. And that's very useful AI, certainly, but it requires that I have access to the physician, the oncologist, who is able to take the biopsy. If I don't do that, if I don't have that access, how do I get access to healthcare? Non-contact approaches are a great avenue for doing so. And surprise, surprise, it turns out that non-contact technologies are being patented by large players in the healthcare space. So in both of these examples here, this has to do with images, processing images to determine state of your health. The company that secured the patent on the right-hand side has also a patent on using your voice signal to determine the state of your health. And of course, the two companies that have secured these patents are not your traditional healthcare technology provider. They're actually Google and Amazon. You think about how large and successful Google and Amazon have become, how ubiquitous they are in every aspect of our lives, and they too are pursuing non-contact healthcare as key initiatives. There's some headlines over here. Look at this: DeepMind, which is a Google division, can detect over 50 eye diseases as accurately as a physician. Smartphone applications that can tell you're depressed, detect depression. Depression is one of the largest chronic conditions worldwide. Here's a wearable that can detect signs of diabetes. So these are all non-contact biomarkers. So how can we make healthcare scalable so that we can complement the contact-based healthcare providers? And this is once again a way of delivering healthcare equity by leveraging data. The previous FDA director, Scott Gottlieb, put some wheels in motion of helping ease the approval of digitally based technologies for delivering medical solutions. So this is a wonderful thing that was done and this is still FDA policy today. And many different products have received FDA approval that are data-driven. The article there on the bottom left, you'll see mobile phone urine testing. Think of that. You don't have to go into the lab. You can use your mobile phone. And quite a few companies have achieved these FDA approvals by now. Some of you may have seen that in the recent past, probably in the past month or so, the first video game was approved for treating kids with ADHD. So completely non-contact and non-pharmaceutical. Use a video game to treat children with ADHD. So we're fast approaching the day when the doctor prescription is an app. It's actually possible to deliver talk therapy using chatbots. A couple of papers over here. The paper on the bottom came out of Stanford, and that's actually been instantiated online. You can find this. It's called Wobot. It's talk therapy, as you might get from your psychiatrist. So mental health conditions are a reality worldwide. Again, you may not have access to it either because of location or finances or even stigma, but you certainly deserve that care. What's a good way of getting it? You might be able to get it from a chatbot. So healthcare is a zero-sum game. It's being employed in lots of interesting areas. AI technology, rather, is being employed in lots of interesting areas within healthcare, for everything from drug discovery to echocardiography to image analysis, for cancer biopsies, things like that, which are all great. But that side of AI and data within healthcare all requires that the individual, the patient, have physical contact with the healthcare system. Non-contact AI, non-contact data signals, as we've been talking about, essentially have unlimited scalability because it's coming off your mobile device. So it allows you to deploy innovation for maximum social impact. So if you're scratching your head thinking, where might I want to focus because I want to have a positive impact on society, non-contact healthcare is a great way to go. So put another way, where are your innovation resources best deployed? Because money and brain power is a limited resource, right? So if you have a limited supply of money and brains, do we focus on impact by contact, or do we focus on impact by non-contact? It might be that the impact that we can have on human health is much greater by focusing on non-contact solutions. So the big question here about how one uses data and things like that, the goal of healthcare is to bring more effective care to more people, which I think is the case. Why not harness more sources of data? All of these non-traditional signals, which are very deterministic of the state of my health. So non-contact AI, I believe, really is the future of healthcare, and great examples from patents that companies like Google and Amazon are securing that lend credence to this position. Cell phones are quite common nowadays. So the population of the world of people who are 15 and over is almost 6 billion. We have almost 5 billion cell phones, and I think by now approaching 3 billion smartphones. They think about the ubiquity of the smartphone across the human population. It's enormous. It's such a wonderful platform for achieving social impact. So enabling healthcare scalability, here you see the Nobel ceremony, but all data is healthcare data. We talked about some examples here in the talk. No matter where that data comes from, it might come from a search engine, which you stitch together with the wearable, which you stitch together with population data, either from a public source like CMS or a private source like Twitter. Stitch that all together, get a correlation, and this is what unlocks understanding of health in a cheap, scalable, and predictive way. And convinced I am, and you heard it here first, that a future Nobel Prize winner in medicine will be a data scientist for helping enable just the things that we talked about. So hopefully that's you right there. Social justice via data. I mentioned the use of mobile phones as ultrasound scanners. Article there on the bottom is came from the New York Times, and it's about doing so in Uganda. Applying AI for things like diabetic retinopathy in the developing world, where there's a huge impact from that. Again, all enabled through data. So that was it. I wanted to leave some time for questions. We're 45 minutes in. Thank you so much. Please fire away and let me know what I can further tell you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Shomit, for this talk. This is really great. I think like you know, as basically our social climate here today kind of makes it necessary that this discussion needs to happen within technology, and data ethics and technology ethics are a big thing that's kind of being discussed right now within like, you know, like as far back as like Facebook and Google when they were called in for their congressional hearings. So it's been going on for a long time now. So it's really great that you were able to talk to us here today. One thing I would like to plug for you is your SCET class over at Berkeley called Amazoogle. So this talk here today was very similar to your like general class structure over at Amazoogle. So I was wondering if you want to say a few words about Amazoogle and kind of like advertise it for next spring or anything like that.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for that plug. So the class was supposed to have been offered this fall as well, but it fell victim to university-wide budget cutting. But supposedly will be offered again in the spring, and it's been offered for a few years by now. And what it's about is, and the name of the class is Amazoogle, which of course is a concatenation of Amazon and Google, because those two companies have done a really world-class, wonderful job on leveraging data. And they do so in a way that very few other companies approach. And this is why they're able to outcompete everybody in every field. So what the Amazoogle class is about is what is the philosophy of data that these companies employ. And we also layer into it the ethical considerations of using that data, because, you know, as we talked about here, any business that's unethical cannot survive. So it's important to have a successful business, great, but one of the aspects of success is the ethics of the business. It's not merely your profit margin. So as you'll remember, Akshat, we talked quite a bit about using data in the right way to achieve competitive advantage, but doing so in a way that also respects ethics and privacy.
Right. Yeah, and for those of you kind of interested in this, I could definitely tell you, use your phase one on this class. It is definitely like probably the best class I've taken at Berkeley. So I definitely recommend this class to any incoming freshmen out there. So now I want to jump into some questions. What do you think, Shomit? How many questions do you want to take here today? We have about like 10.
Yeah, well, fire away. Maybe we can get through all 10.
Okay, cool. So I'm going to actually allow live questions with the condition that I will call on you guys because I want this to be as interactive as possible. So I will go ahead and do that. And I will start with the person who asked about the Twitter controversy. If you're here, you can unmute yourself and ask that question. Okay, I'll go through the question. So this question was about the Twitter controversy between Jan LeCun and Tinmit Gebru. Basically, Jan LeCun was claiming AI bias is caused by bias training data. And Tinmit Gebru was claiming that model bias could go beyond data. So what do you think about this bias between data?
Yeah, I think both are right in what they say. It's easy to police algorithms because you can think, well, am I doing something that's skewed in some way, easy quote unquote, but it's really difficult to police the data, and the data can have things built into it, and because AI is running off and doing curve fitting, and it's a black box and it spits out results. Oh, great, it correlates, wonderful, let's do it. And you don't understand what the underlying data was, and you end up doing something which is having a damaging effect on somebody. So it's super easy to run afoul of, as we saw in some of the examples I gave today. And this is why I think as a practitioner, as a business person, as a technologist, you can never let your guard down. Every morning you have to wake up and kind of in a cold sweat thinking, oh my gosh, I know we must be doing something wrong, because it's only through that kind of vigilance that you can hopefully prevent from doing things that are wrong.
Yeah, yeah, and Malika, feel free to unmute yourself and let me know that your question was answered, and if you have any follow-ups. Still not letting her. Okay, that's fine. She's messaging me on Zoom. I think she's having Zoom problems. That's okay. So I guess another question we have here is, how do we make sure that things like chatbots don't stop us from fighting for the social change needed to destroy the stigma it circumvents? Let me know if you need me to repeat that.
No, there is a particular danger in chatbots. Chatbots can be really effective because they're scalable, as the example with Wobot. But if the intention of what the chatbot is doing is not a good one, or if it is also mistrained on the data, they're quite personable. We gave some examples in class this semester, as you might recall, of even AI-generated pictures of people, which can be animated using chatbots. So, hey, how much more engaging can you be? But the back end of this might be some technology which is not doing something that's beneficial. It might not be doing something it might be doing something that's not beneficial either by design or by accident, but the effect on all of us is pretty profound. And we saw this even with a simple, quote unquote, medium as Facebook in the 2016 election, when you had a lot of polarization that was driven because of the data that was being put out on that medium. So I think chatbots need to, because they are actually so human-like, they present a lot of positive potentials, but there are a lot of negative potentials there too.
Okay, next question. So how do you think that we can best do effective contact tracing for COVID while still maintaining high standards of ethics and data privacy?
Yeah, I wish I knew the answer to that one. Do you have any easier questions? Yeah, so I don't think I can give a blanket answer to this, because it gets back to my, this is an everyday thing. We have to wake up every morning and think about what holes we may have accidentally put into this. So, for doing contact tracing and still maintaining privacy, we have to make sure that there's as little identifying data as possible for bad uses. When you look at data, you actually don't need a lot to actually figure out things about people. And again, a couple of examples that I gave there, but it was using things like the uniqueness of your heart rhythm to actually identify exactly who you are. So those sorts of signals, it may be that there's somebody who lives in your city block who has COVID-19, and that person isn't identified, but a bad actor could look at some other dimensions of that data signal and figure out who that person is. And those are the kinds of things that have to be avoided. I know some of the recent efforts, I think the one in Norway actually in doing contact tracing was found, I think it was the one in Norway, was found to have some holes just like this, despite the best efforts of these Norwegian health practitioners. So yeah, I wish I had a good answer on this. I don't, other than this is one of those issues where you just have to live your life with paranoia as an implementer, and
right.
Yeah, trying every morning kind of wake up and see what you can stamp out in terms of privacy violation.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree. Pranay, do you want to start with the next few questions?
Yeah, sure. So one question that I see here is there a government level awareness of bias in data / tech? And are there any regulations to control them?
Yeah, that's a great question. That one I think I can answer. That's a great question. So if you remember when Mark Zuckerberg testified in Congress, and a senator asked him, I think it was Orrin Hatch, so exactly how do you make money? So there was a pretty deep misunderstanding or lack of knowledge on how technology works. And for every human endeavor, the practitioners know it better than the non-practitioners, right? So the car mechanic knows your car better than you will know. The doctor will know human physiology better than you will know. And technologists know technology better than governments will know. So they're at an advantage. There's an asymmetry of knowledge there. So as a consequence, I think regulation will always trail the technology. And I don't know how we get around this, but I think that that will always be the case. We have a lot of promising efforts here. So California CCPA to protect consumer information, GDPR in Europe, I think has also been a great first step, but neither of those are be all and end all sorts of solutions. They both still, those and others still fall short of where they need to be. A simple way of thinking of this is that if you look at GDPR, before GDPR, these data monopoly companies made money by selling your private data, basically, right? GDPR, and this is why all these services were free. GDPR came along, and guess what? Those services are still free. Why? Because our information is still being harvested, so despite GDPR. So I think these steps are important. I think they need to be taken. I think they need to be stronger. But will they ever catch up with technology? I think the answer is no. So as a consequence, given that, I think as a practitioner, as a technologist, you have to do the self-regulation, because merely complying with the regulations that are in place may not enable you to act ethically, actually. So going back to my 3 questions of ethics, the self-regulation is very important for us as practitioners and as consumers, always realizing that the measures that have been put in place, things like GDPR, CCPA, are very well intentioned. They're steps in the right direction, but they're still insufficient.
Okay, cool. And also another question I've seen, it's a clarification on something you talked about ethics. So this person asked, at one point you stated that unethical business practices are not sustainable. Later you cited big/successful tech doing unethical things with people's data to suggest that they were not ethical. How do these 2 ideas coexist?
Yeah, I think that we're seeing some backlash already against Facebook, right? So where does this end? And I believe that also we as human beings, we want our businesses, the people that we engage with, to be ethical. If you had a barber or a restaurant who was either shortchanging you on your change or adulterating your food, it wouldn't matter how good or cheap the food was or the barber services were, you wouldn't go there because you don't want to be taken advantage of. So I think the same applies in business. So I think particularly if you're doing a startup where you're looking up and you're seeing these large players out there, how do you compete? I think as a consequence, the best pillar you can have in your competition strategy is to be ethical from the very beginning, because that already makes you more attractive to the end user, to the individual. Will the companies that have engaged and been cited for unethical behavior by the government, will they continue to prosper? Yeah, maybe. We have a lot of polluters who polluted, who are manufacturers who polluted or employed child labor who are still in business, right? So they haven't gone out of business. And so it might be that some of these big giants will not go out of business, but how do you compete with them? I think ethics is the best way of doing so.
Okay, and then another question regarding this is, can you address the ethical concerns that have arisen from misapplication of healthcare is a zero-sum game against disabled people?
I'm afraid I don't know enough about that, so I couldn't give an answer. So it's probably something I should find out more about, but unfortunately I don't know.
Okay, let me just look for another question here. Yeah, go ahead.
One thing I did want to do is let people ask their own questions. I think I let the participant chatting enabled now. So I would like the person who brought up the issue of tech ethic legislations that you wish to see either internationally. Do you want to speak up and ask that question?
Hi, that was me.
Go ahead, Carolyn.
Hello. My question was, what are the most urgent pieces of legislation you hope to see either internationally or nationally in regards to tech ethics?
Yeah, great question. So I think a great first step would be to enact this thing with, the whole, I simplified it, but the whole thing with the interview question. In an interview, I'm not allowed to ask Akshat his marital status, health status, sexual orientation, any of that. We need to specifically prevent companies from using data to draw those conclusions. If you look at facial analytics today, which are running rampant, right? And maybe it's been going to be put off a little bit by mask wearing, but facial analytics, there are companies that are getting patents on determining the state of your emotions based on facial analytics. So you think about how powerful that is. Not only can you be identified, you can choose not to shop online, or you can choose to clear your cookies so you can be anonymous online, more or less. You can't choose to go around without your face. And if technology is being developed to read your facial features, to understand your emotions, to know what's going on inside your mind, how intrusive is that? So it's these sorts of things. It's the most fundamental right to privacy is to know what's going on inside your head, right? And should it be legal to be able to do that? Should we even be funding university research studies, which a lot of these are, to be able to determine people's emotions based on a facial analytic? Is that an ethical use of what might be public research dollars? So it's these sorts of things. It's a very, very complex situation, just because the impacts of these data analyses are so far-reaching, and so broad. So anyway, I think things like this are really important. There was a paper that Stanford published a couple of years ago, which was, and they did it just to highlight that things like this can be done. They didn't do it to try and expose people, but the paper had to do with doing a facial analytic to discover your sexual orientation. And I think roughly the figures were, if you're male, they were, I don't know, 80% accurate, and female 75% accurate, something like that. But pretty high degrees of accuracy, right? So you think about that. It may be that you have a particular sexual orientation no one knows, but your picture is up online on your social media. That's just there for someone to take that down and run this analytic and say, guess what we just figured out? And certain sexual orientation that's against the law in many countries in the world, right? And this is now publicly discoverable, essentially, by doing a facial analytic. So it's these kinds of things that I think really need to be legislated against, of discovering things about you that you don't want to be publicly discoverable. And we already know that. It's already enshrined in how you can interview people for jobs. So we need to enshrine that in legislation for AI as well.
Thank you. May I ask a follow-up question, actually?
Absolutely.
I'm wondering how effective this sort of legislation can be on an international level, because if we were to have national legislation, for example, how do we know that there won't be the same technologies developed further down the line by a country like China, for example?
Yeah, that absolutely could happen. If there's a silver lining to the US being such a dominant player in tech, is that, wow, maybe if we had that regulation here, then all these US startups and the larger companies as well would make this part of their practice and operation. And so the benefits of that would accrue to people worldwide.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, cool. So it seems like we've gone over time. So I'd like to thank Shomit once again for giving us your time today. And if we still have a list of questions that we can send you after, and if anyone else wants to ask you questions, you have his email from the presentation. So yeah, once again, thank you for your time. And we loved today's talk for sure.
thanks so much for having me. Really, I was flattered and honored to have been a guest, and I wish everyone well.
Thank you. Yeah. And for everyone else, we now have, like, on a similar note, a data visualization and analytics workshop hosted by Shauna. So if you guys want to check out the more technical side of what you guys just heard about, you can definitely check out that workshop now too.
All right,
Thank you
bye-bye.
so much. Bye.